Bhargav, as far as healthcare is concerned, there are two Indias. At one end of the spectrum, there is a world-class hospital that caters to people who can afford them. At another end of the spectrum, the poor do not have basic healthcare facilities. So how do you bridge this to India? Is technology the way forward?
I think technology can play a huge role. I'll give you an example. So, just a couple of months back, I was in a very, very poor district of Odisha. And there, one of the temple trusts set up a small hospital.
Okay.
What I was most impressed by is that they've got a small telemedicine center. They've connected with some of the best hospitals. And you sitting there, they can get telemedicine, advice through telemedicine. Okay. Now, telemedicine, everyone says, should grow at 25–30%. So that's one. I think the other thing that I'm very optimistic about is there is a lot of innovation happening in terms of low-cost devices. Okay. Both Indian entrepreneurs as also very large MNC companies which are looking at the Indian market and seeing whether they can develop devices which is suitable for low-cost delivery model that India needs. So I think technology potentially can play a big role.
Do you think the government should make it mandatory for CSR money to be spent in the healthcare space, because there is always a shortage of beds and doctors and various things? And also they should ask this corporate India to concentrate on the preventable part, like preventive illness, sanitation, waste management. Do you think it's possible to make it mandatory?
Look, I wouldn't agree to make it mandatory. I totally agree with you that it's a very, very important element of where the CSR money could go. But a lot of people from the other sectors will argue that education also needs a lot of funding. So does skilling, for example. So if you look at what we are doing in ICICI Group, in ICICI Foundation, we've got skilling, financial inclusion and healthcare. These are the three key areas where we spend our CSR money. Okay. So to answer your question, I think CSR can be a very large pool of funds which can address some of the healthcare gaps, even without making it mandatory.
But I was just reading a PwC report. This says that India needs something like $245 billion over the next 20 years to have various deficits, to overcome various deficits. I think we need something like 3.5 million doctors, 3 million beds and 6 million nurses. My question is, where will this money come from over 20 years? Because it's almost like $12 billion per year. So do you think it's doable, or we should adopt some PPP model or something like that?
I think we need to look at various models of financing. I wouldn't like to comment on the numbers, but whether it's 12 billion or 10 billion or 8 billion, the number is large. And I think we need to look at various financing models to make it work. You talked about CSR. I think the entire approach to create demand for healthcare will drive supply is one belief that I have. The second thing is, I think we have an opportunity to look at the healthcare model, as I earlier articulated, in terms of looking at the healthy side of it, or focusing on the preventives rather than just focusing on the sickness. The third thing that I would want to talk about is, it's not just in terms of hard cash. I think anyone in the sector realizes the gap in terms of the capabilities, the softer aspects, in terms of the number of nurses, the number of doctors. It is going to take a huge amount of investment, not just in terms of money, but in terms of time as well. So there is a crying need to look at how do we address this gap through various models of financing that can address this huge gap that we have.
So finally, should the primary care and the secondary care be a responsibility of the government, while the tertiary care should be via PPP model?
Look, increasingly world is realizing that you cannot fragment care. You have to look at it in as a continuum, from the preventive to primary to secondary to tertiary. I think the most important thing that we need to think about is looking at the patient, design a patient-centric model, and look at care at whichever segments of the healthcare provision ecosystem. Because at the end of the day, if you fragment care, which is what, if you realize, happened in some of the developed markets, the cost of healthcare goes up tremendously. True. If you look at a patient-centric model where you are addressing all healthcare needs, focusing on keeping the patient healthy and preventing illness, that's probably the most efficient way of building a sustainable healthcare model. If you want to do that, you have to focus on the preventive, you have to focus on the primary and the rest of the ecosystem. So our view is that whichever model you look at, I think think the insurance player or the provider or the trust has to look at health outcomes and looking at preventing illness rather than just paying for sickness. That's very key in terms of designing a sustainable ecosystem.
So patient-centric model is the way to go.
Absolutely.
Bhargav, it was a pleasure talking to you. Nice to be on the show with us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ravi.
Bye.